Well, good morning and welcome to each one. Haven't seen you since last year, and look forward to the year ahead of us. I just want to make you aware that council meetings are available live through Zoom, and recordings may be posted online on County of Huron's YouTube channel. You may be seen and or heard as part of these broadcasts, and your name, comments, and or presentation materials will become part of the public record. So welcome back as we begin our new term and in preparation for a website refresh and other upcoming communication projects. Staff collected information on current services and have presented them in the County of Huron value proposition document, and each of you that's here in person has one of those in front of you this morning. So I would encourage you to read it, be familiar with it. And it was created by our communications team to help all staff understand the significance of their work, their role within the larger organization, how their efforts interconnect with other colleagues and departments, and how they contribute to the overall corporate vision. So take the time to become familiar with that document. And I'm going to move on to the approval of our agenda. That would be motion made by Councillor Finch and seconded by Councillor Bazinet. Those in favor? And that is carried. Is there any pecuniary interest that anyone needs to declare at this time? And seeing none, we will go on to the minutes of our previous meeting. And if there's any questions, errors, or omissions to address, by all means, make us aware. And if not, I'd be looking for a motion to adopt the minutes. So Councillor Anderson, past Warden McNeil would second that. Those in favor? That is carried. Councillor comments. We don't have any delegations presentations today, so I'm going to go right to councillor comments. Is there anything anybody would like to address at this time? Seeing none, then we're moving on to item 8 on the agenda, our consent agenda. There's 8 items on there. Is there anything specific that anybody wants to speak to? And if not, I'd be looking for a motion. And that motion is made by Councillor Goderich, seconded by Councillor McClellan. Those in favor? That is carried. So we're moving on to our Huron County aggregate strategy. And Denise is here in person to present to us. So welcome, Denise. And when you're ready, you go ahead and start.
There we are. Thank you very much, Warden. Good morning, everyone. I'm here this morning to present the scoped update to the Huron County Aggregate Strategy. This is a body of work that was first completed and approved by County Council back in 2005. What I'm presenting today is a technical update that was done to reflect the change in legislation, policy, and practice over the past 20 years. So the purpose of this report is to provide an overview of how aggregate resources are planned for in Ontario and specifically in Huron. It includes an overview of the policy framework, updated mapping of the aggregate resources we have here within the county, and then a series of recommendations, everything from official plan policies to zoning provisions, looking at how we're communicating how aggregates are planned for in Huron County, and then looking at some opportunities to do data and monitoring so that we can provide updates on a more regular basis as opposed to having 20 years in between policy work. So as I've outlined, in 2005, there was a very robust process undertaken to develop the initial aggregate resource strategy. This was led by a technical committee with a steering committee, and they looked at a number of detailed policies and directions that could be incorporated into local official plans to help to manage environmental, social, and economic considerations when it comes to aggregate. So what has changed? Many things have changed in the past 20 years. We've had a series of change in policy direction from the province. Now, some of that's come through the Planning Act, the Aggregate Resources Act, the Provincial Planning Statement. So there's been a real shift, I would say, in the municipal responsibility as opposed to the provincial responsibility, much more so being with the province at this time than it would have been years ago. There's also been changes in terms of new legislation. Things like the Clean Water Act didn't exist when we did this initial work. We've also had major changes to how we process planning applications. So for example, Bill 185 was passed last year, and that has removed the third-party appeal rights for anyone who might wish to appeal an aggregate or any other official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment. And then landscape-wise, I had to remind myself that when we had done this work back in 2004, 2005, the north part of the county, most of the municipalities and townships did not permit surplus farm dwelling severances at that time. That didn't come in until around 2010, 2011. So there has been a number of changes that have been reflected. In terms of where we are today, I think it does help to look at the provincial perspective. How big of a player is Huron when it comes to the aggregate industry in Ontario? And we represent 2.5% of Ontario's overall aggregate production. So just over it's about 4.2 million metric tons is where we are at as of 2021. As you can see, there has been a substantial increase. We were about 3 million metric tons about 20 years ago. It's interesting to look at where within the county we're seeing that aggregate being extracted. Where are the properties located that the aggregate is being extracted from currently? This will have changed over time. So if we think about back in the 1990s, I would imagine Central Huron might have been a bit higher than it is today. What we can see is that as of 2021, over 40% is coming from ACW. I also thought it was interesting to take a look at where have we seen the number of pit licenses change over the past 20 years. And what you'll note is that when we go by former township, only Colborne and Howick have seen increases in the total number of licensed properties over the past 20 years. So every other jurisdiction has either seen it remain the same or has actually experienced a decrease in the total number of properties licensed. The difference being Howick, there has been an increase, and the most substantial increase has been in Colborne Township in Asheville, Colborne, Wabanach. So I'll talk a little bit about how we do the mapping for aggregate deposits. What we start with are the aggregate resource inventory papers known as ARIP. So these are provided by the province, and they provide basic geological information that outlines where aggregate deposits are within Huron and what quality. What we're interested in doing is protecting those, we're interested in protecting deposits generally, but particularly those deposits which are commercially viable. So our primary and secondary deposits, which truly could be extracted at a commercial basis. So we have identified those. So we start again identifying those areas that are primary and secondary. Where are they located within the county? And then we start to look at how do they interact with other features across the landscape. So certainly our aggregate deposits are most commonly found under agricultural fields, though they also have a number of them that have natural environment features. Some have had landfills, for example, developed over top of them in years past. We've seen interactions with cemeteries, recreational uses, rural schools. So there could be lots of land use interactions, and we have mapped those as constraints. And then we are recommending that those deposits, which have no constraints, would be designated for extractive uses in all of the local official plans, and that sort of acts as a streamlining of approvals for those properties. It's not to say that there aren't still rigorous requirements. They would all require approvals under both the Aggregate Resources Act as well as a zoning bylaw amendment. Through that zoning bylaw amendment, there are a series of technical studies as outlined in the scoped update, everything ranging from archaeology to hydrogeology, looking at cultural heritage impacts, environmental impacts. So it's still a very rigorous process, but it would no longer require an official plan amendment if that area is deemed to be unconstrained. So we've rerun the model with updated information, and I thought I would just spend a minute to talk about how they compare. Overall, the models are incredibly similar. There are some new constraints that have been introduced, and we have removed some of the buffers that were included back in 2005. This in part responds to the direction from the province. This particular corridor is south of Holmesville. There's a provincially significant wetland where we previously would have buffered 120 meters. Now the direction is only down to 30 meters, so that has been included. We've also included some new constraints. So at the top of this map, you'll note that the former Mid-Huron landfill was not mapped in 2005. We do consider that to be a constraining factor, and so it's been included in the model moving forward. So there are individual municipal level maps at the end of the aggregate strategy that outline where are all the constrained and unconstrained deposits within each of the local municipalities. Those maps would be used to inform the designations in the local official plans, while still certainly allowing for that local lens to be applied at the time of the 5-year review. So the goal of the aggregate strategy is to create some consistency for how we plan for aggregates, while still allowing that there can be variations at the local level. Rehabilitation was also something that we've seen some really new things in the past 20 years. So we did organize a bus tour. So that was in June of 2023. Many members of Huron County Council were there through the Water Protection Steering Committee. We had the opportunity to visit several rehabilitation, some to natural environment. One was to a vineyard, which is very interesting, a wetland, and then we also had the opportunity to visit a sub-water pit. It's actually owned by the municipality of Central Huron, and give some thought as to what happens to those landscapes post-extraction. One of the county's own forests is a former aggregate pit, and so a great example again of where we can see a former space being rehabilitated to both natural environment and passive recreation. The MAP program is one I thought I would just highlight. They've done some incredible work in Huron over the past 20 years. So this is sponsored by the aggregate industry, and they identify historic or legacy pits and come in and do the rehabilitation at no cost to the landowner or the local municipality. It's entirely paid for by the industry. So in Huron, MAP has completed 45 projects, resulting in 175 acres of land being rehabilitated. And again, we had the opportunity to visit one located in Central Huron, known as the Wise Pit, and it has now a really beautiful wetland space. So when we began the terms of reference for this project, sort of outlining what would be considered, one of the requests from County Council was that we did consider the planning for post-extraction water bodies. And so that was something that staff certainly put our minds to over the term of the project. Interestingly, we were also in the process of updating the South Huron official plan. And so I had the opportunity to visit and spend some time with a landowner that owns a very large subwater pit. It's in multiple ownership. It has entirely been abandoned or extracted at this point, so they have surrendered the license. And so it was just a really neat opportunity, I think, for staff to have the chance to see, how can land uses be established in proximity? What do we need to think about in terms of safety, in terms of setbacks of development? And so very appreciative to the Prout family, for those of you who would be familiar with their property there on McTaggart Line, to do some learning. So that did inform new policies, which are recommended to be incorporated into all of the local official plans. And it'll provide direction if there is to be development other than agriculture or natural environment in proximity to a water body resulting from aggregate extraction. What do we need to think about? What are some of the things that might govern or give some guidance for that type of development? The Aggregate Resources Act is very specific. There is a legislated requirement that the land use return to the most recent land use prior to extraction. So for most properties in Huron, there will be a legislative requirement under the Aggregate Resources Act that those lands be rehabilitated to either agriculture or natural environment. If someone wanted to do a different type of land use, which we have seen in the county, they would certainly have the opportunity to do so through a specific land use application. Okay. So just to get into the key changes, we are recommending that we designate only those deposits which have zero constraints. So we think it's really important that we balance this interest across the landscape in terms of public interest. Environmental, social, economic. We know aggregate is a non-renewable resource, absolutely critical for the housing and infrastructure construction. At the same time, we want to do it in a balanced way. So we are recommending only those with zero constraints, providing additional direction for post-aggregate water bodies. And finally, what we'd like to clarify is something that I think has a little bit been lost over the past 20 years. It's that the mineral aggregate designation in a local official plan in no way guarantees that there is aggregate there and it is possible to extract it. It's indicating that it's likely to be available in that location, unconstrained by other competing public interests. So really important to think that there are other conditions that will have to be verified and assessed prior to that extraction occurring. And that all happens through a very robust process. As I said, a combination of the Aggregate Resources Act and zoning bylaw amendments under the Planning Act. So moving forward, we would recommend that updates to the county official plan be incorporated. We actually have an amendment coming forward for the PPS, so we could incorporate it into that. At the time of 5-year reviews and zoning bylaw updates, we do recommend that the recommendations of the aggregate strategy be incorporated at the local level. We'd like to see more ongoing data collection, monitoring, and reporting. And finally, some work towards best practices and communications. We're looking to have an opportunity on the new county website for a dedicated page for aggregate planning to help provide the information to landowners who perhaps don't understand the process well and are looking for that additional information. So finally, it's my recommendation that the aggregate strategy scoped update be received and that County Council direct that it be implemented in local official plans through the 5-year review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. I'm going to go to council if there's any questions. Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Denise, I'm just curious, based on the amount of extraction that we do today, is there an estimate of how long the supply would last for what Huron County is supplying?
I don't have those numbers, no.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Past Warden Ginn.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. My question in regards to water bodies resulting from aggregate extraction, we've had this conversation before. I do question, you know, a lot of these lands, and I'm talking particularly about south of Honesville, that are all basically under the water table. Why natural environment is included in what was previously an agricultural field over recreation?
So for that specific area, most of the properties have been extracted in such a way that there isn't a land use viable in terms of agriculture or natural environment. There essentially have been extracted to the edges, right? There's berms left, but there really wouldn't be a lot of land left for another land use. It's possible, for example, on some of them that they would leave enough land that they could have one residence, for example, and the one residence would be sort of accessory to that water body property. We've conceived of, you know, would that be supported through the policies? We think it would be, but we would want to really look at the distance between that residence, you know, accessory buildings, the septic system to that water body, because we do recognize from a source water protection standpoint, it is a direct link to the aquifer, and we want to make sure that there's also for safety perspectives, right? We want to make sure that there's enough distance between any future development and the water body itself. In terms of recreation, I think there's a real interest in that. The trouble in terms of some of our corridors, and I'll use the one south of Holmesville as an example, because we still have so many active aggregate industries occurring there. The question is it at the right point in time in terms of introducing more sensitive land uses into an environment where there's still a lot of industrial type of activity happening there? The Prout Farm was one. It was just sort of an interesting opportunity for us to go and look at because it's entirely surrendered. So there is no more aggregate happening, at least on that northeast corner. And so it provided a little bit more space to have a conversation about, you know, what might be other land uses that could work in a space like this.
Follow up?
Yeah. So, you know, recreational, we have 11 campgrounds in Central Huron currently. And to me, these are perfect sites for campgrounds. I'm not convinced that there's not enough room for them. That would be determined through an application, obviously. But, you know, things like our wakeboard park that's currently operating in a former gravel pit for, I think, 3 or 4 years now without incident. I don't know that I am comfortable with restricting those types of activities. I think they're very positive. It's a great business for a demographic that don't have a lot of things to do in our area. So things like that, and I could see, you know, paddleboarding and passive activities like that would be an excellent use of those resources, and I think would contribute to economic development in our area. Anyways, I love natural areas. We have a lot of them here, and we can incorporate things like campgrounds into natural areas. And I just think there's a huge opportunity there. We see how little lakes are developed in Muskoka and elsewhere, and some of these ponds are the size of some of those lakes. So you know, I don't want to confine what we are approving here, excluding those types of activities. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you for that. Denise, I'm just going to add is in the 5-year reviews, is there opportunity to address those comments that past warden Ginn gave us?
I think there is. I think we could develop a series of policies and say in the event that these types of uses are proposed, here would be some considerations and some policy tests to think about. That's sort of the beginning of what we've done through the aggregate strategy, and certainly open to thinking about that more. The Central Huron OP is under review right now, so that might be a good place to start.
Is that suitable, past warden Ginn? Okay, all right. Councillor Klopp, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I had 3, and just to, if I may comment on Councillor Ginn, I think he's got the right idea, and I'm hearing that, well, when we do a 5-year review, but my sense is that this is going to be a template that's going to the councils for their 5-year review. So I think I would like to see some wording that does recognize what Councillor Ginn commented on, so that the council of the day realizes that they can have an option to discuss. My questions are: who in the industry was part of the update this time?
Denise?
Yeah, we had representatives of the aggregate industry on the bus tour, and then we had discussions with various aggregate operators through both individual applications and long-range planning.
Okay, and you have a list of those somewhere?
I don't believe there's a list in the document. I can provide a list of those who we spoke to, yes.
Thank you. Second question, you mentioned that we're going to have in this report 0 constraints, ones will be designated. Is there a process for the others, like they come to the council of the day and make an argument that they wish to have that look at opening their pit? Did I read that in this report?
Yes, definitely an opportunity for those constrained deposits to eventually be extracted. In that case, there would be an official plan amendment required in addition to a zoning bylaw amendment.
And I have no problem with that. I thought I read that, so I just wanted to make sure. I'm kind of constrained here on getting my material in front of me, but thank you. I wanted that for the record. And the third question is, you mentioned in the report that we wish to have more data and information. And could you expand on that? Because being part of that group way back in 2004 and following it a little bit over the years from friends that have gravel pits, there is a lot of data that they have to submit. It's there. Every load has to be accounted for. I just was talking to gravel the other night at hockey, and there's been a whole lot of new rules put in place. So I just wonder what you mean by we want to have more data and reporting. Could you expand on what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it would be county level data. So looking at the amount of aggregate extraction that occurs in a given year in the county, looking at the number of new licenses opened, the number of licenses surrendered. So it's just more of a high level, what are the trends in the county over the years? I think that's something that we haven't done really consistent reporting on. And so when you go to do a project like this 20 years later, it would have been nice to have a bit more of a wealth of data to look at. And that's something we think would be worthwhile moving forward.
Okay, if I wrap up, sir, thank you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, this shouldn't be onerous. The information is there. You're just going to ask them from the province because they have all this information that you're just going to cut and paste. So I don't see a big problem with that. It shouldn't be too onerous. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions? Councillor Vanstone.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a quick question. The monitoring of these pits. I live in Coburn Township, and as you can see, and as my late predecessor, Russell Kernigan, said, Coburn Township slowly but surely leaving one load at a time. And we take a lot of gravel out of Coburn. I guess we're either blessed or cursed with the fact that we do have the gravel in Coburn. So, but the monitoring of the pits is the biggest issue I've found anywhere on these things. So do we have any input on that at all through this, that we could help push the ministry to monitor these pits more, make sure they're more user friendly? I don't think anybody cares if the gravel goes, as long as they know there's light at the end of the tunnel that within, and I think realistically 10 years, but the ideal would be is if they start the pit on the north end and recondition it as they go to the south end. And when it's done, it's been all done, because I can take you out and show you where pits, they've got berms up that are growing nothing but weeds, dust. It's terrible. And there are good ones, but there's a lot of bad ones too. So I was just wondering, is there any monitoring that we could do or push for monitoring of these? Thank you.
So the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, did send a letter in May of last year responding to the Auditor General's report in December of 2023. I think the AMO letter does a really good job at highlighting how, the call for increased inspections and enforcement is important to municipalities, also thinking about things like cumulative impacts from an environmental perspective. So I think that if there's an interest in that, I think working with AMO would be the best way to advance that particular concern.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Denise. Denise, you speak in report there about rehabilitation is paid for by the aggregate industry. Could you expand on that? I think I know how that works, but just a refresher would help. Thank you.
So the rehabilitation program that I referenced in the report, the MAP program, only applies to those which are historic sort of legacy pits. When it comes to modern day pit, so if someone was to apply for a license today, they themselves are responsible for that rehabilitation work. And there's very stringent requirements about things like none of the topsoil being able to leave the property and how it's done. It has to be done in stages and whatnot. What I will say is that there's a series of properties across Huron County that would have been approved in those sort of interim years. So it wouldn't be considered a legacy pit. It wouldn't be eligible for MAP. It would have had a license. But if we think back through time, we simply didn't have those stringent rehabilitation requirements. And so I've certainly been to sites in the county where the operators have told me, all of the topsoil was trucked away years ago. And so trying to rehabilitate those spaces is incredibly difficult. You just don't have the soil there to rehabilitate to an agricultural standpoint. Even getting, some trees or natural environment established can be quite difficult. So rehabilitation is something that I think we've seen some really great examples and some best practices that are being done right here in the county. We can sort of share some learnings from that and celebrate. I think it's a great thing, but ultimately rehabilitation is the responsibility of the operator when they reach end of life.
Pass Warden Ginn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Warden. And I agree with what Denise just said. And years ago, the first ones to be extracted were the ones where there was virtually no topsoil on top of the gravel. And I'm very familiar with it from our historical farm, which did extract gravel. But getting back to what Councillor Vanstone said, I just wonder if is there an ability in the Act to put a time limit on a license so that they would be forced to extract all the gravel in there and rehabilitate it rather than stretch it out over many decades.
Denise?
That would be specifically under the Aggregate Resources Act, but no, I do not believe there's the requirement or the ability to put a time frame on it.
Any further questions, comments? All right, there is a prepared motion in our agenda package if someone would like to move that, or an alternative motion if desired.
I'll move.
So moved by Past Warden McNeil, seconded by Councillor Finch. Going to call the question. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Denise. So we're at 11 in our agenda, administration policies and other issues. And this is a follow-up report prepared by our clerk Cronin, and she's available for any questions that anyone would have on this. Seeing none, then we'll look for someone to put the motion forward. So Councillor McClellan would do that, and Councillor Anderson would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. So we're at our strategic priorities chart, and our CAO, Megan Wark, is available for any questions that would arise from that. Seeing none, then we want to receive that report, and I'd be looking for a motion for that. So that would be Councillor Harding and Councillor Becker. Those in favor? And that is carried. So the part of our meeting we've all been waiting for, we're going to go to our draft budget for 2025. And I believe Michael Bloomhagen will be joining us and starting us off on this. So Michael, when you're ready, we'll look forward to that. So Michael, once you're ready, what we're going to do is just have you go through the presentation you've got for us. And if you have questions, just write them down, and then we'll try and address them all together at the end. And I think that'll be our easiest way to help those joining us by Zoom to follow along.
Thank you, Warden. And to County Council, it's my pleasure to present to you today, or introduce the 2025 draft budget for your review. I thought there'd be a few more people here in the audience, but yeah, okay, well, that's good. Yeah, this is actually budget number 12 for me. So it's, once I start adding them up in my head in terms of how many budgets, I've kind of presented it, it starts to, there's always a similar theme. There's always financial pressures, but the story's always a little different in terms of, what's happening within this year. So it's always been interesting in terms of how that story has changed over time. So today, myself and the departments, or a few departments, will just be presenting the high-level overview. We're just going to focus on the executive summary that is attached. We do have a detailed budget available for your review, and that's available online as well. And we're able to respond to questions on that. We're just not going to be presenting that today. And we're just trying to keep it a little higher level and without getting bogged down in some of the details. And I do apologize. I've got a bit of a cough. I came down with something last week, so I'm still on the tail end of that. So if I have a little bit of a coughing fit, just bear with me on that. So my apologies. So we will be having a parking lot available as we have in previous years. Rather than having the debates or directors not being prepared to respond to various questions, we're going to write that down on our list in our parking lot, and we'll have that detailed discussion on February 12th, which is our special budget day. So what is actually before you electronically, it's slightly different than what I handed out in paper. So we had that deferral of the Highway 83 roundabout, Airport Road, that intersection. So I've actually removed that from the budget. The overall budget doesn't change. Obviously the projects did, but in terms of our overall asset management funding strategies, those projects are all funded by reserves and some provincial and federal funding, but the overall budget hasn't changed because we're still maintaining that same asset management strategy. So I'll be walking through the consolidation just to explain a few of the pages, go over some of the corporate budgets, and then I will pass it over to some of the directors. So I was quite pleased, really, where we're starting off this year. Happy with with where we ended up for this initial draft. I feel it's a good starting point for us to have some fruitful discussions. So we are proposing a levy increase, draft levy increase, with an increase of 8.39%. So that's an increase of 4.4 million. And that would be a total levy of $57 million. If we actually include total taxation, which includes supplemental taxes throughout the year, and also payment in lieu of taxes, we'd be at about 58.3 million. So the role that was, or the assessment role that was returned by MPAC at the end of 2024, that actually increased by 182 million. So we had some excellent growth last year, and primarily in the res property classes, which was a benefit for us for this budget. So if we're to actually maintain exactly the same rates as 2024, we would actually be able to see a 1.52% increase in our budget, or a levy increase of 814,000. So this is beneficial. It helps to shift some of that burden from existing taxpayer or existing assessment to new growth. So we would, so in order to fund the 8.39%, we'd be looking at a tax rate change of 6.75%. Just getting into some of the impacts that we would see based on this. If we were to approve the budget today as it stands, we'd be looking at that median residential property for a tax impact of almost $82 for that one median property, with an average class for residential of $95. If we get into the farmland, that median farm property that's valued at just a little over $1 million, the impact would be $96, with an average change for all properties within that farm class, average change of $91. So some of the key changes or considerations in the 2025 budget, we've included non-union salaries at 3%. So this is a staff proposal at 3%. The impact of that is $717,000. Just going to increase size here. In terms of some estimates, we're at the final year of the Homes for the Aged, the phase-in for the 4 hours of direct care hours. So this will be our final year in terms of or enhancing our staffing to meet the needs of this legislation. Overall, we're seeing an estimated cost of about $750,000 for this enhancement in legislation. And that's primarily due just to the reliance on agency staff that we do have. In terms of the hourly rate that we receive in terms of subsidy from the province, it just doesn't cover some of the rates that are being charged from agency. So there's a cost to this. But as we eventually phase out agency with more successful recruitment, we'll see that burden be decreased for the county. But just in terms of perspective, over the 4 years, we had to add 84,000 hours in terms of staff hours to our staffing complement, and that's significant. And not only is there like just that potential labor cost, there's other ramifications to that in terms of the burden to support those extra hours. If you actually look at the detailed homes budget, you'll see there's parking lot expansions that are required. And that's directly attributed to more staff being on shift and just requiring more space for our staff to park. So there are some extra costs that are associated with this legislation. Yeah, again, just as I mentioned, there's that additional cost for the agencies. When we do the budget, we budget at 100% county staff, and then we account for what we estimate for the differential for agency. So in terms of the 2025 budget, we're estimating that there would be an additional cost of $975,000 that we do incur in terms of salary differential as a result of our agency staff. And I do know that there's some additional information coming back to council. It was requested from a report from the homes in terms of some of those agency hours. In terms of grants, we currently have one grant in the budget, and that's just an ongoing funding for the Huron County Food Bank Distribution Center. So we have $66,000 in the budget for that. No additional grants are provided. We've included at the request of council, we've included the $200,000 for the town of Goderich for their court security funding. In terms of our asset management, right now, as it stands right now, we're looking at a 3.05% increase or impact on the levy as part of our asset management funding strategies. So that's an increase of $1.6 million. Again, just based on current dollars, we'd be looking at raising $10.8 million to support our asset management program for the county. So if you recall, just through the asset management plan as part of that financing strategy, just to mitigate or to manage the future pressures, staff were recommending an annual increase in that 2 to 2.5% range. While this 3.05 is a little higher than that, if you recall last year, we approved an increase of 1.38% for our asset management funding. So if we average out the 2 years, that's about 2.5% or 2.25%, which is essentially in line with their strategy. So a little bit of a pop this year in terms of our asset management funding, but it's in line with our financing strategies that we've included. And those strategies that includes raising levy, leveraging reserves, and potentially debt in the future. In terms of infrastructure funding, we've included $12.75 million in infrastructure funding from OSIF and our CCBF, which is gas tax. And part of this is our current year allocations of about $8.7 million. But then we had a number of dollars set aside and carry forward from prior years. So we were able to use that carry forward this year just to assist with the infrastructure needs for 2025. So of that, we would still have about $1.5 million available for 2026. And that is to assist with the deferral of the roundabout project. So for OSIF itself, we have estimated funds of about $9.67 million in terms of available OSIF funds. That includes current year allocation of about $6.7 million plus $2.94 or $3 million that we had parked from unused from prior years allocations. So the two jobs that we do have OSIF applied to them, County Road 83 for the phase 2 of the Dashwood reconstruction at 2.5 million, and at County Road 7 paving job, we have 6.5 million set aside for that in OSIF. And as mentioned, we'd be deferring 1.5 million to support the 2026 project for the roundabout. In terms of the gas tax, we're looking at, so our current year allocation, 2 million, a little over $2 million. And we have had a carry forward of about 2.6 million from prior years. So we are allocating a full 4.56 million this year in our budget, with projects including the Bannockburn Bridge at 3.86 million and one of our large culverts at 700,000. Excluding carry forwards, going forward, our annual allocations are currently about 8.7 million. So that's really what we would have for available funding in the future, minus any potential carry forwards that we might have. But that's kind of our base level of funding at the moment, is 8.7 million between both of those infrastructure funding programs. So we're not proposing any additional debt this year for 2025. With the Wingham project, phase 2, currently just funding that from our reserves. So we're not looking at assuming any additional debt for that project for the time being. So we'll just preserve some of our debt capacity for some future projects as needed as part of our funding strategies. But we do have existing debt that we are repaying. So we have a total in our budget, 598,000 for two previous projects for some bridges and phase 1 of the Wingham Yard. So we do have debt repayment included in our budget for that. In terms of staff changes, there are a few staff changes being proposed. One, we have the legislated increase in our direct care hours. For the homes, we don't really have any choice on that. We do have a proposed upstaffing with EMS. So that's additional, I believe it's 4 FTE in Bayfield. So that's an upstaffing for EMS. And you would have heard that through the ORH reports. Requesting one additional student position within Public Works. Some additional casual hours for provincial offenses. And the request to make 2 current contract positions permanent, one in cultural services and one in social services. Health unit, we have that included in our budget, and they will be here on day 2 as part of a delegation to present this budget to yourselves. Insurance costs have stabilized, thankfully, for the county with both the county policy and our public housing. We are seeing some increases there, but it's primarily just related to increases in property valuations and additional properties coming online that, such as our housing build. Overall, just liability claims experience has been good at the county for the last couple of years. So that increase on the liability side was minimal, which was good to see. Our OMPF funding, Ontario Municipal Partnership funding, that's continuing to decrease at the county. So that went down by 97,000. So we are currently receiving for 2025, 554,000. And that continues to be phased out for us at the county. We're just not eligible for that funding. Extended benefits. Seeing some increases there. So a 5% increase in health, 7.5% in dental. These costs have actually moderated for the county and are really just being increased based on the actual claims experience that we are experiencing based on actual claims. And this allows us to break even with our required reserve levels with the insurer, and just to also mitigate any future rate adjustments. If you recall, the last couple of years, we had some more significant increases as we had to account for the increased usage. So the impact of the increases for extended benefits is 133,000. In terms of our total capital budget, We have 42.9 million in terms of total capital expenditures being proposed in this budget. And in terms of how it's being funded, 9.6 million of that is being raised through the levy. So we really don't have a lot of levy dollars, and that's an important theme to remember. So of that 42 million, we're only raising approximately 10 of that with our own levy. 13.5 million is from provincial federal sources. The balance being reserves, whether it's carry forwards or straight draws from our reserves. And we do actually have a little over a million included in the budget for donations for the Gibbon Street project. And if you recall, that's the Bruce Power donation, and at $1,050,000 there from the Kinsman, Lucknow Kinsman Club. So we do have some $1 million in donations recognized in this year's budget to support the Gibbon Street build. So if we're to look at reserves, excluding any potential carry forwards, I'm estimating 43 million at the end of 2025. This is a decrease of 20 million over 24. Of that 20 million, 5 million is approximately just carry forwards. So 15 million would be more of a straight draw from our reserves. So of this 43 million, 17.6 million would be available to support our asset management plan, or just unrestricted usage. 4.3 million would be restricted capital, and that's primarily our EMS-based reserve, which will be utilized for the potential Seaforth base build. We have 5.2 million in terms of our fleet, and 14.8 million in terms of general operating reserves. So that would be available reserves for 26 onward. So for this year's budget, I've included levy mitigation of 1.8 million, and that's just based on our initial estimate for the 2024 operating surplus. Through the Q3, we estimated that we would be in a surplus position of about 1.6 to 2. Part of that was some savings that we had initially estimated through the winter maintenance program for public works. However, seeing how December went, I just don't know how much of that initial estimate or surplus estimate will be realized. So may end up being a little lower than forecast, but we do have general reserves to make up for that. We did include an additional 498,000 in terms of kind of attrition management savings, and also for the timing of the EMS upstaff. So we are, as mentioned, we are looking at upstaffing in Bayfield for EMS. We've included that full 12 months cost of that upstaff within the EMS budget. And then within the corporate, we are looking at just offsetting that through knowing that we're not going to hire Jan 1. So we'll have some potential savings through the year to offset that increase. But I'm setting it up this way in our budget just to be able to maximize our 2026 50-50 funding for EMS. So there's always that 12-month delay in terms of the funding. By setting it up this way, by showing the full cost in EMS, that way come 2026, we'll get that full 50% of the funding. So that's why kind of a little bit, that's why I'm reflecting the savings within the corporate budget. That way we are not on the hook for an additional year of covering that 50%. Within the corporate budget, this is really going to be, in the next couple of years, one of our primary drivers in terms of rate increases or levy increases. And that's really just with our interest income. We're seeing significant declines in our interest rates, but also declines in our reserve balances. So this interest income, which we had leveraged to support some of our levy mitigation, we're not going to be seeing that this year, and it will continue to be some pressure moving forward. So we are seeing a large increase, and this is probably our largest pressure area within our budget this year, is just that 1.2 million decline in our interest rates. So as just with some of these pressures, as alluded to, so excluding so corporately, we're seeing about a 2.5% increase on the levy, just based on some of these interest rate pressures. Public Works, 1.95% increase in the levy, and that is primarily just asset management or capital replacements. EMS 1.15, but again, that is the full app staff there with the savings within corporate and within the housing portfolio at 0.76%. So these themes are fairly consistent with some prior years, but these pressures will continue into 2026. I talked about the OMPF, but again, so that current impact right now, so we are getting 554,000. So that's equivalent to about 1% on our levy right now. So just as a future pressure, as this gets phased out, we'll have to raise levy over time to offset that 1% that we are receiving in OMPF. Labor, it's always a key driver in terms of our budget. We have total salary and benefits of about 64 million here at the county. That's about half our operating budget that we do have. So anytime we are seeing any increases within union settlements or non-union COLA and what have you, that does have an impact on our budget. Some of the 64 million is provincially funded and some is 100% county dollars. In terms of the full-time staff equivalents, we are increasing or estimating to increase by about 14 FTEs to a total of 566 full-time equivalents. But again, that's in terms of total headcount, we'd be in that 700 to 800 depending on the season, whether it's student or seasonal plow and whatnot. But so of that 506, that's full-time, part-time, casual, and seasonal staff. In terms of salary increases across the board, we're looking at 3.78 million, and that's over 2024. Large part of that increase is through EMS, 850,000, and also Homes for the Aged, which is increasing by 1.68 million. And again, that 1.68 million, a lot of that's funded, some not, and that's due to union settlements, grade movements, and the direct care increases. And again, we've tried to estimate some future pressures for 2026 and 2027, just with known operational or some funding changes that we are aware of. We're not seeking any approval for these. It's more just to highlight to council, where we see 2026 and also 2027. So a little bit of pressure in 2026 is ongoing. So we'd be looking at about initial estimates of about 11% increase and about 6.5% in 2027. So once we get through this initial hump, I could see some moderation in terms of budgets. But I do know that we will continue to have some pressure for some time being, just based on our asset management deficits that we do have. So that pressure will continue, but I can foresee at least some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of some of these more significant increases for council. So I don't know if there's any questions just on this first before we kind of get into the others, just to take a pause.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some questions, Michaels, and we're going to start with past Warden Ginn.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. My question has to do with the agency staff at the homes. And I just wonder, has it been growing or shrinking, the use of agency staff in the last year or two? And could you crystal ball to see whether you think it's going to improve or get worse? Just wondered if you have any insight into that. I don't know whether Dana or Laura want to tackle that, but.
I think I'm going to start with Dana on that.
Through you, Warden. So we are seeing a bit of a decline in agency use. We are currently in some negotiations with them in our contract and looking to eliminate or reduce the amount of agencies that we have partnerships with. In that, we have seen some of those staff members come over to the home as well. So we are seeing an increase in some of our recruitment, and as well as we're looking at going to more job fairs, those kinds of things. So we're hoping within the next few years, we'll see a significant reduction, in agency use. So barring any significant changes, that is kind of where we're hoping, but that'll be outlined in the report that we will have for you guys in hopefully at the next council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dana. And I do believe Lara is going to do a follow-up with that.
Thank you through you, Warden. Just to elaborate a little bit on Dana's comments, and it is true, we are seeing a decline in the number of agency, which we are super pleased about. In addition to, I suppose, actively or inactively recruiting some of the agency staff who are now part of our staff complement, we have altered the way that we are posting for our home staff. And so that has proven to be really successful for us. And what I mean by this is prior we would post for casual positions. The way the workforce has changed, used to be casual was it. Folks were looking for that. Now folks are looking for more secure full-time, part-time lines. So we are being specific around what we're looking for. We're doing pre-interviews, getting a better sense of what folks are looking for. And it's proven to be a really successful way to obtain staff and keep staff. I think the human connection too, slowing it down a little bit and taking the time to chat with folks before we actually do a formal interview via the pre-interview is also working for us. So just those little tweaks have really helped to support, bringing staff in and keeping them. So.
Councillor
Yeah,
Passwarden
just
again.
good work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lara. Councillor Passwarden McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Along the same comment or idea, I'm really concerned about the fact that we have the contract staff, period. There isn't a private industry out there that would ever go out and hire extra employees knowing they're going to lose an extra $1 million just to meet market demand. It doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint. So my question is, why don't we say we want to save the $1 million off the budget and we service as many people as we can with the number of employees that we can hire through the county? You may end up with some empty beds. The other side of it is that if you stop using the contract labor, those people no longer have a job. We'll offer those jobs, and maybe you can hire those people back and start to get employees that are costing you $1 million less to do the actual work that we're trying to do. It doesn't make any sense to me to keep paying extra when we're just being told by the government we need to put in more hours to do the work. Cut it back. It's no different than at the health unit. We've let staff go because the funding isn't there to do the work that they're telling us we have to do. So we said, fine, we've cut back the staff. We can't do all the work, but nobody's told us what we're doing it wrong, because the other side of our story is, if you want us to do it, at least help fund it to the way you're supposed to be funding it. They're not even funding the contract labor people for the extra hours that we need to the amount that would compensate the county for the work that we're doing. Let the contract people go and service as many people as we can with the employees that belong to the county.
So, Passwarden McNeil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. I think our staff just indicated to us that we are employing less agency workers than we have in the past. And from my knowledge, I don't think that this is unique just to Huron County. Post-COVID, we saw agency employees being employed with other businesses, entities. And that has evolved into now it being decreased. And I think that this is an evolution that is proceeding in the right direction. not only for the county, however, other institutions. So I think when we hear, and I've seen it in other businesses, that there are actually agency employees that went that route and now are seeing that maybe there are benefits for permanent employment, be it pensions, and are coming back to us. So I think maybe we should just let this process evolve, I would suggest. Thank you.
Okay, Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. All I'm suggesting is that we maybe try and speed up that process. Staff already just stated a few minutes ago that over the next few years, they're hoping it's going to get a lot better. I don't want to be paying an extra $1 million for the next few years, year after year. Why don't we see if we can speed up the process? Let's find out if there is a way to, through attrition, stop having the contract laborers. I'm not saying kick anybody out of the home, but the bottom line is we have faster turnover than we used to have in the homes. So through attrition, just don't hire contract laborers when a bed becomes available until we can hire full-time employees that can actually take on those jobs. From a management standpoint, it's just good business to do it that way. And we're still following the rules and regulations that are put in front of us.
Councillor Klopp, I believe you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Councillor McClellan is just asking, and does it need to come a motion or whatever that he wants to see, and I want to see it too. What would be the ramifications? What the past warden talked about is fine, but I agree. What's wrong with looking? That's what you do at your own business. If it's costing ridiculous amounts for a crop, we don't just say we're selling the farm. We do a cost analysis, and that's all that I think he's hit the nail on the head. Let's just ask the staff what would be the ramifications, put it on paper, and bring it back to us before this, as we're doing the budget process. That's all we're asking. That's all I think he's asking, and I think it makes sense.
CAO Work is going to make some comments now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wanted to make sure that everyone sort of got their thoughts out on the table before I had any sort of response to the conversation. I would indicate to County Council that this is absolutely something that we're seeing throughout the healthcare sector, particularly in rural communities in Canada and Ontario. And I'm aware of it because of discussions that happen at AMO about municipalities really struggling with this particular issue. So just to echo what Past Warden McNeil was indicating, this is not unique to Huron County, absolutely not unique to Huron County. And, in terms of priorities of staff, along with Treasurer Blumhagen, Director Vanstone, and Director Miller, this is a priority area for us, without a question. There is a report that's coming forward to County Council on this particular issue, and I think a number of the comments that have been made today will be happy to capture in that particular report. So there may be value for us to for us as a staff. We've listened to the comments from County Council. We can ensure that we include additional information in that report that captures what County Council has sort of asked about today. Just wanted to provide that additional information to County Council from a CAO perspective, or certainly from a corporate perspective, and also the work that has been happening at AMO.
So we'll look forward to that report to help make some clarity as we move forward. So any other questions for Michael at this time? Councillor Heffer?
Yes, thank you, Warden. I'm just curious, on there's only one grant given, Mr. Blumhagen, the 66,000. I just wondered, how did that number come to be?
Through
Go ahead, Mike.
Warden. So that was an estimate back in the day in terms of Huron County's population. So it was like $1 per resident. So I think we just ended up rounding up a little bit, assuming some population growth, but it was 60. And then it was bumped up to 66,000. But the intent was $1 per resident per year for the food bank.
A follow-up?
Okay, so is that to alleviate of the lower tiers that it was being, because we are all hit with grants wanted from our own local municipalities. So we can say that it's directly through the county representing each of the lower tiers.
Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. If I can respond to this. So I was the one that actually came up with the 60 for $1 for a resident off the beginning. And I didn't even understand the whole system. So if I understand correctly, our money actually goes to the distribution center. So it's not the individual food banks, but with that money, they can do large bulk purchases where they're buying stuff at a huge discount. And then they will share that with the other food banks around the county. So it's kind of a partnership thing. That's my understanding. So the individual food banks that are coming to the municipalities asking for assistance, that's a separate group technically. And so if you're helping them, that's not superseding this money that's coming from the county level.
Sometimes a little bit of history goes a long way. So any other questions for Michael? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Warden. I just wondered, out of all the increase in the staff, how many of those have funding dollars attached with them?
Go ahead, Michael.
Through yourself, Warden. So the within the homes, there'll be partial majority. Some of that's funded. Obviously, there's a small net cost, but the majority of that would be funded. EMS up staff will eventually be funded. So there's always a 12-month lag for 50-50 funding on that. So that would be funded, and the balance, just trying to think, there was probably some funding, and Barb could probably speak to it in her presentation, but with the homelessness coordinator, I believe there's some of the CHIPY or homelessness or OFI dollars, whatever that funding program is for homelessness. I believe there's some dollars that fund that program or that position. But for the other ones, the POA position, we're seeing increase in charge volume. So there's a revenue component to that. So that's essentially offsets some of the revenue that we would be seeing. There'd be a direct cost to the levy for the public works, and the cultural services position would be levy-based funding as well.
Okay. Past Warden Ginn.
Yeah, my question has to do with the carry forwards, and we had fairly large carryovers from last year, and we're using them this year. That's fine, but do we have a certain strategy that we follow as far as when we carry over funds, or is it just we look at the projects and make a decision how we're going to fund them best?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, through yourself, Warden. So in terms of what those carry forwards would be, it would be whether it be funds like levy-based funds that we raise in a particular year, or if it's a carry forward of OSIF dollars that we might have had attached to that particular project. Yeah. So for those, that wouldn't actually be part of the. So at the end of the year, we would look at the projects that are either incomplete or have additional monies that we have to spend that we know that we're going to have to pay for in 2020 or in the future year. We look at that and say, okay, we're rolling those projects that are incomplete, so they either haven't started or they're just in progress. So then we roll those forward into the next year. So for those projects, if there is OSIF that might be tied to that project, so let's say the Dashwood Phase 1 project. So let's say there was $3 million that we assigned in OSIF to fund that project. So at the end of 2024, if only 75% of that project is complete, I will only bring in that 75% of the 3 million in terms of revenue, and that balance will be sitting on our balance sheet as deferred revenue. And then I will then in the following year, then as we incur that remainder, that 25%, then I'll bring that remaining money in and recognize it at that point. So essentially, we don't recognize all the revenue unless that project is completed. So it's so if there's anything that's outstanding on a project, same with reserves. Like if there's a project that we have funded from reserves, I just don't bring that money in this year and then set it up as a carry forward. I'll just defer. I'll leave that reserve within reserves, and then I'll bring it out the following year to fund for that incomplete project. So that's how I do that.
Past Warden McNeil.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Warden. And I would be remiss if I didn't go back to the question, a very legitimate question of Councillor Heffer's as far as the Huron County Food Bank Distribution Center. And there are, maybe some newer members of council that should, we all need to appreciate the great work that the Huron County Food Distribution Center do. It provides food to all of the food banks in the various areas in Huron County. And with the infrastructure they have in place, they have developed so many alliances and partnerships, for example, where they're housed out of the trucking company in South Huron. And they have developed relationships with businesses and organizations that they actually routinely get food donated to them. And I can think of different commodity groups that routinely donate, be it pork, beef, chicken, milk, to them free of charge to distribute that to those that are in need throughout Huron County. And they do a tremendous job on our behalf for those that are less privileged that find themselves in that situation. And I wanted to share those comments from my knowledge and for all members of the Huron County Council.
Thank you for that, Councillor Finch.
Yeah, and just to echo past Warden McNeil's comments, they are like a conduit for all the other food banks that gets, as the past Warden mentioned, about getting that food to one location and then distributing it afterwards. I think we should actually have a tour sometime. There's a county tour next year to actually tour the facility. But Mary Ellen Zielman's just a real champion. All her staff work well. They have a great set of volunteers. So we are very blessed to have it in Huron County. I can tell you that because it's actually helping each one of those food banks to survive. So we need to continue to support it. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands coming up. So, Michael, I think what I'm going to do is just call a short comfort break. We're coming on close to 10:30. We'll just do that. Everybody come back in 5 minutes and we'll continue with our budget discussions.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. And Michael, you're going to continue for us.
Thank you, Warden. Just bear with me for a minute while I share the screen. Okay, so the next few pages within the executive summary, I'll just go through fairly quickly. They're just kind of a repeat of some of the information I talked about through the kind of that intro commentary. But I'll just explain a few things if you do happen to look at these sheets and are wondering what's going on. So page 9, just really very high level summary of our budget. Just a very high level snapshot in terms of what our total revenue and expenses are for operating and capital. So you can see here 119 million in terms of our total operating budget. So that's really what this page represents, is just that high level snapshot. Page 10 and 11, these are the net levy by department. So it doesn't show the actual operating budget for these particular programs. It's just the levy that's required to support them. So some departments have very high levels of provincial funding, small amounts of levy, and other ones are largely levy-based funding. But we do have the 24, 25 with the change, plus we have estimates for what's going to happen in 26 and 27. So you can see right at the top, this is where we get our $4.4 million increase and at the 8.39%. And again, just I touched upon some of the pressure areas like public works, at 1.95% increase on the levy, housing 0.76%, EMS 1.5%, and also under corporate at the 2.5% on the levy. And I apologize, this is kind of small. So this is essentially, and that's really what this schedule represents. The same information, but presented differently, is on pages 12 and 13. So what I tried to do here is just break apart the 2025 levy into operating and capital. So this way you could see that for 25 of the 57 million, 10 million of that is being raised for our capital and 46 million for operating. So same number though, at the end of the day, the 8.39 is just presented a little differently. Just wanted to break apart that the capital versus operating. So page 14, this is really just again a budget summary consolidated, presented a little differently, and it just shows kind of by category of expenditures if you're interested. So you could see in terms of our operating budget, in terms of government transfers, as an example, we have 50 million in terms of primarily provincial funding, a little bit of federal in there as well, but 50 million in terms of senior level government funding to support our budgets, and 58 million in terms of taxation. This other funding, this would really represent, a lot of that would be user fees, accommodation fees for the homes, or rent for public housing and whatnot. And again, just in terms of kind of our expenditure summaries, here's where we have the 64 million in terms of salary benefits. And you can see again, 32 million in program expenditures, 7 million operational and whatnot. Capital budget, this is the 42.9 million in terms of capital, and also our debt repayment that we have for our capital program. So overall, total budget, 164 million for the county. This is actually down from last year. We had 170 last year, and that's really just attributed to some of the capital programs or capital costs that we had last year, being the Sanders Street. We're halfway through Gibbons and pretty much finished phase 2 of the Wingham Yard. So that's what popped up our budget, overall budget last year. So we're seeing a little reduction overall in terms of our full county budget. So page 15, this is just a summary of our full-time equivalents and the changes year over year. So as I mentioned, we are looking for an increase in casual hours for provincial offenses. So as charges go up, we're seeing increased workload with court time, scheduling for early resolution meetings and whatnot. And this was actually a previous position. We had these hours included before pre-COVID. When volumes collapsed, we removed those hours. And now as volume has recovered, we're looking at trying to add that back. A request for a student. So the impact there is $20,000 for one summer student. Here's the impact for the upstaff of the 4 FTEs for EMS. Again, if you recall, 398,000 of that's being offset corporately. Minimal impact on this, but staff are proposing to make the education programming coordinator position. It's currently a contract. We're looking at making that permanent, but really it's just minimum cost overall. You're replacing in lieu with extended benefits. And talked about the direct care increase, and then also under the homelessness program coordinator. So we are looking at, so there's a small increase there of $1,000 for that particular position, but looking to make that change permanent, or that position permanent. And we actually did have a decrease year over year with the half-time position that wasn't replaced within property services, or social and property services. Page 16, this is just a high-level capital program by department. So it shows total capital cost and how it's funded, whether it's levy, external funding, or reserves, or carry forward. So if you can see, just as an example, within Public Works, we have total capital budget of 21.6 million. 4.7 of that is coming from our own levy that we're raising. 12.7 is our infrastructure funding. And we have reserves and carry forward of 4.1 million. So overall, we can see that of the 42 or almost 43 million that we do have in capital expenditures, our levy that we're raising annually is only funding 9.6 million of that. So it's really not a big part of our capital program. And that's why that strategy is in place, because we have to increase this annually, probably for the next 10 to 15 years, just to be able to be at that level where we're going to be sustainable moving forward with our infrastructure. Page 18 is an extension of the capital, but this is our minor capital. So this is part of these are costs that are part of our asset management program, but don't qualify for an accounting definition of capital. But these are more than just general repairs and maintenance. It's part of our asset refresh activity. It's just it doesn't meet the accounting definition. So we like to track that separately in terms of what we use for our asset management. But these particular costs would be embedded in our operating budgets. Page 19 will be our reserves. So this is just a schedule of our reserves. The detailed breakdown in terms of the usage of those would be included in the detailed budget package. But this gives you a pretty good idea of the usage for the year. So we are estimating a drawdown this year of about 20 million. 5 million of that would be carry forwards. So I don't really count that. So really just a net draw of about 15 million year over year in terms of our reserves. So with the ending balance of 43 million. Some of the primary drivers here, we have final draw for the phase 2 of the Wingham Patrol Yard. So that's what that 1.8 million is. We have some homes usage, reserve usage. This is for the generators. And additionally now for some HVAC costs that are required. And we had a full drawdown of the social housing reserve, and that's for the Gibbon Street build. So to support the final cost for that program. Just general usage for our EMS reserve, just to support our EMS budget. Just the ongoing fleet replacement. So this is just based the timing of the cycle replacement of vehicles. But we might see some future pressures here. The rates or the cost of some of our vehicles have actually increased significantly. So we might have some rate adjustments that we're going to have to look at in the future just to ensure that fund is sustainable. And we have just general reserve for contingencies. This is again just the surplus plus some attrition management savings for the budget. So overall, still good shape with reserves to support our asset management funding strategies and also levy mitigation for the next few years. Page 20. So in terms of some of our tax schedules, this is just a tax rate summary by property class. So we do have total assessment of 16.3 billion with weighted assessment of 10.2 billion dollars, and requiring in current draft levy requires a tax rate change of 6.75%. Impact of properties, I spoke to that in my intro, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But again, I had alluded to that single family home. So this is that median property. So that single family home valued at 224,000. Again, that's 2016 assessment data. It's not updated. So that's, we're not going to find a median property valued at this today in terms of market value. But all of the assessment that we do have with impact is based on 2016 valuations. Again, that's where that impact is. That's $79 for that one particular single family home. This is the frequency distribution of tax impact. So applying that increase across our $27,000 households, residential households, that'd be an average of $95 for the change. And within the majority, 18,000 would see an average change of $60. Same chart applies for farmland. For the class, for the 8,200 or 8,300 farm properties, it'd be that average $91. Page 24, it's just assessment change per 100,000. So if you're interested in that, these are the impacts, $35 per 100,000 res. That's assessment by just showing the change in assessment by class. So we can see that of the 182 million, 125 of that was res. And the final tax schedule on page 26 just shows you the change in assessment and also the levy for each particular municipality. So just as an example, Ashfield, Colborne, Wawanach had an increase or change in assessment of 35 million and a levy change of 623,000 and a percentage levy change of 9.19. So there are some shifts amongst local municipal partners. Not everybody is seeing that average of the 8.39%. And again, that just depends on your growth, your new growth relative to your peers. So if you had a higher growth than your neighbor, you saw a higher shift of county taxation towards your municipality versus one that had maybe a lower growth. So as an example, so while ACW went up by 9.19, we could see that North Huron with a much lower growth had only a levy change of 6.99%. So we are seeing some shifts amongst our local municipalities. So that is it on just kind of those taxation schedules. And I don't know if we just pause for any questions on those schedules before we get into just quickly run through the corporate budgets.
I'm not seeing any, Michael, so continue.
And I probably should have stopped share, but we're good. Okay. Okay, so I will just run through some of the corporate departments quickly. So we have the county council budget, small increase here of $16,000. So that increase brings the council budget up to $731,000. Really, the change here is the 3% for COLA. We apply those to the council per diems. So just for interest for the per diems, your full day per diem would be $374.10. And conference would be $4,314. Warden's honorarium, $23,302, and the council honorarium, $6,385, which requires a 75% attendance. So minimal change overall for the council budget. Accessibility, again, small change, looks like a high percent, but it's only $3,500. And that's just some additional work that's being required by the committee for some of the site reviews and site plans. And we're also looking at $30,000 and this for Access SLED grant program. And this is coming from previously set aside surplus or dollars reserve funds for the accessibility department. So that doesn't have an impact on the levy. So if you recall last year, there was an accessible washroom project, which we had set aside some dollars for. That did not proceed. So it's been replaced with this Access SLED grant program. So we are looking at $30,000 from that, and that's funded from our accessibility reserve fund. Corporately, so really the corporate department just includes costs that we don't allocate to specific departments. So we're looking at our impact expenses, corporate software costs, some tax write-offs, grants, what have you. And again, this is one of the key pressure areas for the county, and this is where we are seeing an overall decrease in terms of levy contribution of about 1.32 million, and that's primarily driven by the $1.2 million decrease in our interest revenue. So we are seeing a reduction there. This is the budget where we see the town of Goderich court security. We have our impact costs at 1.2 million. But we also, this is where we reflect our levy mitigation as well. So those dollars are included in this budget. And again, this will be a pressure area for the next couple of years. So we can see a decrease. So in 2024, we actually had a reduction of the levy of 3.4 million. This year, we're seeing a reduction of a little over 2.1 million. But that will continue to decrease in 26 and 27 as we leverage our reserves. So within a couple of years, I'm expecting this department to actually be in addition to our levy as opposed to a reduction of. Administration, not much, there's little change there. Just COLA. So we have a $57,000 increase. $58,000 increase overall for this budget with the levy change of 5.6%. No changes operationally, just ongoing strategic priorities and just cost of living adjustments. Within Treasury, we are seeing a little greater increase within the Treasury Department. So of about $99,000. 30,000 of that we are proposing an office for renovation. So this would be for office furniture for this particular renovation. So this would be in addition to the budget. And there would be a further additional capital cost within the property services budget. So when you get to that, you'll see there's about $300,000 included in that budget for a renovation of the Treasury office. So that is a greater increase than normal. The other pressures just within the Treasury Department would be cost of living, grade movements, and a little bit of overtime costs. Under BTS, so this includes our IT services, our GIS department, and also our 911 program. And again, overall, minimal increase, about 2% or 53,000 for BTS. No strategic changes, just ongoing priority items for the department. But we do actually have a reduction of a GIS student within BTS. So we had previously included a GIS student for a full year. We're reducing that down to 4 months. So there's some savings within the IT budget for about 34,000 in savings for that reduction in that student position. And lastly, provincial offenses. So we are seeing a return to more normal levels for our charge volume. And we see that with increases in revenue. But with the increased revenue, there are some variable costs that come along with that, and there's additional workload. This is where we are respectfully requesting that we add back some additional casual hours. We're not looking to hire a 0.5 position. We're just looking at upstaffing casual hours as required. We just have a small pool of casual staff and we book as needed. So this would just supplement our ability to staff some additional court time and whatnot. So this would be on an as needed basis. There is a future pressure here within the POA department. So right now, the Crown Attorney's Office, they look after paying for, scheduling, and managing the Part 3 prosecutor. And we pay minimal costs for that. It's $5,000 or $6,000 a year that we might actually pay for that. They are actively seeking to download those services to the municipalities. Some courts are willingly picking that up. We are taking the position that it's optional and we're not willing to pick that or to assume that download just yet. Because there would be a significant cost. So we'd probably be looking at $40,000 to $50,000 to hire our own Part 3 prosecutor to manage this. So while it remains optional, we are holding firm in our position until it becomes such time when they're going to require us to assume that responsibility. So that will come at some point. It's not a matter of if, it will be when. But so that could be a future pressure that we'll see for this Provincial Offences Department. So that's a future pressure that, so stay tuned on that. So aside from that, I think I'm pretty much wrapped up and ready to pass along. So I don't know if we want a couple questions now or wait till the other 3 directors have.
I do have questions now, Michael.
Yeah.
So past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a couple. One thing that we seldom hear about, and I'm going to say that's good news, is the whole business technology section. I know in the past we've had a couple of close calls with stuff like that, but since we don't hear anything, I'm going to make the assumption that we're pretty comfortable with where we are. I'm not worried about the money that's in the budget. It's an important thing that we need to do. I'm just wondering if and I know we had a session that Susan had put together where they had talked about training for the counselors and stuff like that. Great sessions. But I'm just wondering if we could get some sort of report at some point of just how comfortable we are or any concerns that the staff have going forward. I think that'd be good information. The other thing about the Part 3 prosecutor, Mike, I agree with you. Why would we want to do it if we're not being forced to at this point? My only concern is if it came down to, let's say it was next week that they all of a sudden said everybody had to do it, would the cost of those prosecutors go up because everybody was looking for one at the same time?
Go ahead, Michael.
Through yourself, Warden. No, we wouldn't. I don't foresee like just a spike in prices on that. We would just leverage our existing Part 1 prosecutor probably to provide those services. So I wouldn't anticipate, and that's through Donnelly and Murphy. So I wouldn't anticipate any dramatic increase in costs in terms of our ability to procure a Part 3 prosecutor. So. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, Michael my apologies, Councillor Klopp, you have a question.
No problem. I should be there. Thank you. I think it's to the treasurer. With regards to Gibbon Street, back in the day, we had passed a motion. I think it was about $2 million for engineering, and that was based on a 10% cost, which was about 20 million. And then the good news came in. The budget for actual cost was about 15. And the engineering, et cetera, was, I think that report was something like 460,000. Just wondering, where is that engineering money where is that accounted for in these pages? And the second question again is about reserves. At the same time, when it was found out it was going to be about 15, well, the thing came in at 15 million. There was a motion passed that the money that was being taken out in the original from roads was to be put back in roads, and just wondering what page that shows up on. So there's two questions there. Thank you.
Okay,
And
Michael.
I expect an answer right now, but to be fair to the treasurer, but I would appreciate just showing me where those are accounted for. Thank you.
Michael, it's your choice whether you want to address that now or come back later.
Yeah, through yourself, Warden. In terms of the specific pages where it is in the budget, we'll address that as either through Barb's presentation next week or through the parking lot. But it would be part of the detailed budget. It's not in the executive summary. So within the detailed budget, there's a detailed reserve schedule in terms of the usage. So that would be reflected in there. And as well as the capital costs. We would probably have to provide additional information in terms of the breakdown of the Gibbon Street project. The amount that would be listed within the capital budget would just be the total project cost. We wouldn't have it like listed separately in terms of the components of what that is. So we would have to provide some additional information on that.
And Councillor Klopp is good with that. Okay, we can continue, Michael.
Through yourself, Warden. So I think at this point, we will pass it over to Director Vanstone for the HR budget. And I will share my screen.
Okay, Lara, once the screen's up, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Warden and members of County Council. So just quick thanks to CAO Work and Treasurer Blumhagen, as always, for their guidance and support as we navigate through budgets every year. They're tremendously helpful and supportive. So HR's budget this year highlights you see an overall increase of just over 78,000 or 8.14% over 2024. This is due to COLA, step increases, and there's a small overlap in early mat leave return. We're also for 2025, overall HR will continue to complete a number of projects as identified through our own departmental HR strategic plan, as well as in alignment with the workforce planning identified through council and the strat planning we did together with council and SMT. So highlighted through that will be the non-union market review and pay equity testing. It's time again to have a look at that to stay competitive with both private and public sector. So we will be, last time we did a review was in 2022. And so we will continue with, that's one of the bigger projects that we will be doing this year. That's it for us.
Well, thank you, Lara. Is there any questions for HR at this time? Seeing none, then Michael, I believe we're going to go on to the next, which is planning and development.
Great. Good morning, and through you, Warden Heffer, I'm happy to present the Planning and Development Department budget. The detailed budget can be found on page 239 of your budget package there. The draft budget covers the core functions of the department, including land use planning, forestry and stewardship, climate change and energy, and sustainable community development, which includes our committees that council are familiar with, such as Water Protection Steering Committee, Sustainable Huron, and the Huron Clean Water Project. The proposed budget increase for the department is 6.7%, which is an increase of $159,000 over 2024. And I'll just go through and summarize some of those key changes for you. So the first one being there's a proposed decrease in planning fees revenue of $65,000 for 2025. And I'll just give you a little bit of brief history about that. So during COVID, the number of planning applications sort of nearly doubled across the county. And as a result, revenue was increased over 2022 and 2023 by $165 to reflect those actuals. The application numbers have now returned down to sort of pre-COVID levels, and due to several factors, including the high interest rate and market factors and the housing-friendly policy update work that we have worked hard on to avoid the need for planning applications. So to better reflect the actuals going forward, there was that, sort of the blip during COVID, but to better reflect the actuals going forward, the anticipated revenue has been reduced in the budget. This does allow staff time to allocate towards important policy updates, official plan. We have a few official plan updates on the go right now, South Huron, Central Huron, as well as some zoning bylaw projects and helping municipalities out with community improvement plans and heritage conservation district plans. On the forestry side of things, $40,000 has been included for legal for some forest conservation bylaw cases that are ongoing or ongoing in 2024, going to be ongoing into 2025. There continues to be $500,000 included for the Huron Clean Water Project, and similar to last year, the proposal is for $400,000 from operating and $100,000 being transferred from the excess funds in the Water Protection Reserve to offset that levy cost. In the department, staff levels are going to remain the same in 2025, so no proposed changes for staffing in 2025, with the changes being the standard cost of living and benefit increases. Although we have no new staffing, you will see some new faces in planning and development in 2025 as we have a number of parental leaves coming up this year again. And then as on the capital side of things, our budget is a fairly small capital budget in comparison. There's $3,000 for chairs and office furniture, and we're not anticipating any forestry capital purchases again this year. We have a really great partnership with Public Works and Property Services where we can share equipment when Dave needs it. So that is a great partnership there. So that summarizes the Planning and Development Department budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Looking to see if there's any questions. Councillor Klopp, see your hand there.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Could I have a breakdown? How many of the department is planners, and what is the breakdown Could you help me out on that, please?
Through you, Warden Heffer, certainly happy to do that. So in total, we have 17.33 staff in the Planning and Development Department. We have eight planners that cover the 9 municipalities. So one planner covers 2 municipalities, the planning manager and the director. We have front office staff, a land division administrator, and then the other staff are those more specialized projects, a biologist, stewardship coordinator, climate change and energy specialist, and our forest conservation officer. So 16 full-time equivalents, and then the 1.33 is for 4 student terms. So we have a planning student term for each term of the year, which has proven to be a very good recruitment strategy for us. When we have leaves that come up, parental leaves, then we have staff that are trained up, students and those graduates that are trained up and ready to cover those contract positions. And then we have a summer student in forestry helping Dave walk the trails and make sure that they are safe for for public use over the summer.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Sandra, I always thought that the majority of the planning budget was a user pay system because we certainly do charge out the services from the planning department, but there must be a lot of other avenues or departments in there. But it seems like quite a differential between the $2.5 million that is coming from the levy and the $570,000 that's collected through fees, if I'm reading this correctly. Can you give me a little bit of an explanation on that, please?
Sandra?
Certainly. Through you, Warden Heffer. So yeah, there is a component of revenue and user fees, but what is not covered in that is the time spent on dealing with inquiries that come in from across the county. So quite a few of those, as well as all of our official plan and zoning bylaw update projects. Those are covered under the general levy benefit to all of the municipalities for those 5-year reviews. And similar to the housing friendly review or policy work that was done, that there's not a user pay system for that. We're assisting the municipalities with keeping their documents up to date. So, and then the additional part is the forestry, environmental side, climate change side of things. So I guess that's where the additional planning work that comes in that doesn't have a user pay system part of it.
Councillor Vanstone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Down to where it says continue with the clean water project for $500,000. Is that ongoing forever? I know it's all mapped out and it's scheduled. So is this for policing, or how does that work and how long will it be there? Thank you.
Sandra, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Warden Heffer. The Huron Clean Water Project allocates funds for property owners and community groups to do stewardship projects on their property. So there are grants available for property owners to do stewardship projects. The project has been running for 20 years. Each year, the full funds are allocated to property owners to complete those projects. So we've seen a lot of successes over the years, and we did just did a bus tour of the projects. You can really see now on the ground 20 years of that, the results of that funding. So that is for the implementation and the, we partner with the conservation authorities to help property owners to implement those projects and the grants that are provided to property owners.
Okay. Any other questions for the planning department? All right, then we can move on to library and cultural services. Go ahead, Beth, when you're ready.
That's great. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. So Mike has the executive summary for the library services on the screen for you there. Just a note for members of council that the draft library budget was presented to the library board on December 11th, 2024, and a final draft will be presented for their approval on January 15th, 2025. Overall, we're looking at an increase of about $175,000 or 4.8% over 2024. And that includes key projects in 2025 reflected in the budget, including the books and materials budget. That includes print, magazines, object library, as well as digital. In 2025, we see an additional $7,500 for digital materials. Branch projects in 2025 will include completion of the Clinton refresh, as well as the reorganization of the Seaforth branch to better meet community needs and also to accommodate the Ontario Ancestors Huron County branch collection that's moving to that branch. Due to increased demands for printing at library branches, we are deciding to replace our aged printers with leased photocopiers, and we're also going to add a printing app to streamline the printing process. Stage 2 of youth engagement work will occur in 2025. That's fully funded through the McCall McBain Foundation. That includes increased youth-focused programming, implementation of digital media stations at several branches, creation of a youth organization, ongoing space upgrades to several of our branches, and there is the addition of a temporary staff person to support that work. And lastly, EDI work in 2025 happening at the library includes plans to recognize Pride, Truth and Reconciliation, and Welcoming Week, as well as staff training and an audit of the library collection to ensure that a broad range of perspectives are represented. That concludes my comments on the library budget, and I'll move on to cultural services on the following page of the executive summary now. So just a reminder for all members of council that this includes the museum, jail, archives, and the cultural office budget items. The overall increase is just over $56,500 or 3.51%, and that includes plans in 2025, such as marking the 50th anniversary of the jail as a National Historic Site. So we have plans to commemorate that this summer in conjunction with National Historic Places Day. The museum van, which is used to transport artifacts to outreach events throughout the county, as well as moving items to offsite storage, will be replaced in 2025. That will be leased over the course of the next several years. Additional costs in year 1 will include branding the van with a wrap as well. We have several reconciliation plans or initiatives for 2025. These include the creation of an Indigenous Understanding booklet, completion of the mural in the lobby of the museum, as well as ongoing planning for the 200th commemoration of the Huron Tract in 2026 and 2027. Another core plan in 2025 is to continue our enhanced programming. The addition of the education programming coordinator has proven very successful, and it's proposed to be made permanent in this budget request. We've been able to better leverage the funding that we've received from Compass Minerals to bus students to the museum for class visits. In 2024, we saw over 60% more class visits, reaching almost 3,000 students. We were also able to add PA Day camps, as well as an additional week of summer camp was added in 2024, and we plan to do that again in 2025. These represent not only revenue generating opportunities, but also providing much needed childcare in the county as well. In 2024, we did exceed our revenue projections in educational programming by $15,000. And as a result of ongoing increased capacity with this staff position in 2025, we have plans to attract more group tours, increase our partnerships with the school board, implement the youth strategy, and also do more truth and reconciliation work. Also in 2025, our collection management software needs to be upgraded. This software houses information about all the artifacts under our care, being the description, location, provenance, and donor information about those artifacts. The software is outdated, and BTS has concerns about its stability and security. So costs to transition to a more suitable alternative are included in the budget. The Museum Theatre will undergo updates in 2025. The primary upgrade will be to replace the current seating in the theatre, some of which has begun to fail. There will also be an opportunity to address some other minor issues in the space as well at that time. And with respect to the cultural office, programming in 2025 will include the Multicultural Festival, Main Street Arts Festival, community arts programming, as well as Truth and Reconciliation and LGBTQ2S+ programming. Thank you.
All right. Is there any questions for Beth on either library or cultural services? Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Beth. Beth, I apologize if you've already explained this and I missed it, but can you give me some more details on the IT fleet pressures as the library no longer is eligible for education pricing? I'm not sure what all is entailed there.
Go ahead, Beth.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. So previously, all of the library staff MS365 licenses were purchased with educational pricing, which is significantly reduced from what a regular license is. Unfortunately, that's no longer applicable. So that's resulting in a significant increase in all of our staff licenses. So every staff that has an email, all of their word processing, all of that is resulting in a large portion of that increase.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Any other questions? Councillor Harding?
Just one question about maybe the relocation of a branch. Is there anything in the budget to cover what that may cost, or fees going ahead, or things, anything about that?
Go ahead, Beth.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. At this time, there are no concrete plans to move a branch, and as a result, we don't have any costs built into our budget to accommodate that.
Okay, any further questions? Past Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Back to the previous question, Beth. Have you ever considered, and I understand that you don't have the newest technology if you go ahead and buy that Microsoft product rather than going through their leasing program, but if you buy it and plan to repurchase it maybe every 4 years, would that not save money over top of their new licensing agreements when you're not getting the discount?
Beth.
Through you, Mr. Warden, I would not be the correct person to respond to that. That would have to come through BTS. Yeah.
And I believe Mike's going to address that as well.
Through yourself, Warden, thank you. We'll provide some additional information for the next parking lot on that. I just don't know if Kim's online, but in terms of the licensing, it's not like if you buy a device, you have the license for 4 years. Essentially, it's an annual subscription now. So they've moved away from that perpetual licensing, and it's just an annual subscription cost. So for every staff person that we have an email for, we have to pay that Office 365 licensing. For the libraries, that's full cost now, unfortunately. We don't, the Microsoft moved away from that. So it's not like there would be savings that we would have if we, I forget exactly how you asked your question there, but again, those savings really wouldn't be there because it's just that it's an annual subscription cost per employee, per whether or not they have a computer or not. So.
Follow up, Past Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Then you're probably educating me on something here, Mike, because my understanding was the way the software used to be licensed out, you could still, if you only needed Windows, or not Windows, but Lotus or 123, if you only needed that, you could still buy that as a separate item. And you're saying you can't do that anymore?
Mike?
For yourself, Warden. And again, I'll get some additional details on that, but my understanding is no, we don't have perpetual licensing. There are different variations, though, of the licensing that we can get. So there's price differentials for if they're like email only versus if they're going to be using Word or Excel or different things like that. So there are different prices that we do have available there, but again, there isn't that perpetual license that we can buy anymore. They've moved solely to annual subscription costs for licensing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, last chance. Any other questions? Yep, Councillor Heffer.
Yes, thank you, Warden. Yes, I had a good conversation with Mr. Bloomhagen there yesterday, and I appreciate the two-way street we have with him. And, but I just was putting out a feeler that our HR, and I'm not picking on any groups at all, is 12.73 last year and 8.14 this year, is 20% over 20.75% over the 2 years. This has to come out of our taxpayers, and I'm just wondering if it could be put on your parking lot. That is there any way that some of these things can come down a bit? Like I know a lot of people, I'm sure in some of your towns have fixed incomes, and I just find this money's going to be harder and harder each year to get, and I see where our interest is going down. I understand that, so I just think we have to pull some numbers down. Thank you.
So a parking lot issue, Michael, is there anything you want to address on that at this time?
Not at this time, Warden.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the comments, and that's been noted. Okay, so that brings our budget discussion today to a wrap up. So I'd be looking for, I have a motion actually from Councillor Finch that we receive the draft budget presentations at this time. So seconder for that. Pass Warden McClellan. Those in favor? And that is carried. Is there any items under correspondence that anybody wants to pull out and address? Councillor McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I believe it was 12.3. I'd like to pull in support. I think that's at Municipal Accountability Act.
And is there a seconder to, Councillor Finch would second that? Those in favor? And that is carried. Anything else in correspondence, Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Warden. 12.12 from the town of Cobalt about catch and release, because it does have a big impact on our provincial services.
Do I have a seconder for that as well? Councillor McClellan, those in favor? And that is carried. Councillor Anderson again.
Thank you, Warden. 12.7, the City of Markham, the resolution regarding the Solve the Crisis campaign, read the growing mental health and addictions and homelessness issues.
Okay, is there a seconder to endorse that as well? Councillor Vanstone, question, those in favor? And that is carried. Anything further from correspondence? So then I'd be looking for a motion to accept the correspondence not specifically dealt with. Councillor McClellan, seconded by Councillor Ginn. Those in favor? That is carried. And under new and unfinished business, we have the McCollum McBain Foundation grant agreement. And I believe Brittany Wise is going to be joining us. If there's, Vicky is going to be taking her place. So Vicky is going to be addressing that if there's any questions that you have. And seeing no questions, then we'd be looking for a motion to receive the report and approve entering into the grant agreement. Councillor Heffer would move that. Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. And we're at bylaws, and I would be looking for a motion to adopt the 5 bylaws that are in our package. Councillor Bazinet. Councillor Klopp would second that. Those in favor? That is carried. There is no close to the public session today, and a list of upcoming meetings for you to be aware of. So we're moving right on to our confirmatory bylaw. Who would like to confirm our actions for this morning? Councillor Becker, seconded by Councillor Finch. Those in favor? That is carried. And I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Dietrich, seconded by Councillor Heffer. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We covered a lot of ground there this morning. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of your morning.